10 maths, it's extremely important. So even though it was done last year, we need to repeat it and reinforce it in grade 10. Right? So difference of 2 squares. Right? Now, a difference of 2 squares is just an outbreak expression like, okay, generally we say a squared minus b squared. Okay? Sometimes we can also write this x squared minus y squared. That's a difference of what? 2 squares. Now, a difference of 2 squares can be factorized, but a sum of 2 squares cannot be factorized. So you cannot factorize x squared plus y squared. This can't be factorized, but the difference can be factorized. When you factorize the difference of 2 squares, you get 2 factors that are binomials, right? So when you factorize a difference of 2 squares, like that, a squared minus b squared, right? You open your 2 brackets, right? I'm taking you back to the basics of what happens during factorization by difference of 2 squares. So what you do, you find the square root of the first term of the binomial, right? So you need to find the square root. If there's a minus here, you can start with the minus there between the terms. Then you find the square root of the positive of the second term. So that will be the square root of b squared. Right? In the second bracket, you just rewrite the first term of the first bracket. So it means you're finding the square root of a squared. Then the sign now, this sign here, you change the sign to the opposite, which will be an addition sign. And you repeat what you did with the second term of the first binomial. Right? So this is generally what you have to do when you are factorizing by a difference of 2 squares. So in the end, if you simplify this, you get a minus b times a plus b. So when you factorize a squared minus b squared, you always get a minus b times a plus b. Now I want you to be aware that we can also write this by starting with a plus b. Okay, it's not always that you start with a minus b, but it's your choice. So it's the same as a plus b times a minus b. It's the same. If you go back to your knowledge of FOIL, if you use FOIL there to remove brackets, either this way or that way will make you go back to that. Okay, so it's up to you. Generally, in my case, I prefer this one. Okay, you can decide which way you prefer. I prefer to start with the minus. Okay, but if you start with the plus, it's fine. As long as the second binomial is going to have a minus right here. You can't put a plus here and a plus there. And you can't put a minus here and a minus there. No. The signs must be opposite. Okay? So I'm going to emphasize that there, that these signs, okay, they have to be opposite. Opposite. Right? This and that. They have to be opposite. Okay. So make sure you are aware of that. I can just make that singular. Okay, let me remove that S there. They have to be opposite. Okay, so it's not very difficult. In actual fact, factorizing by difference of 2 squares is one of the easiest techniques of factorization. Okay, so let's do some examples. So here, I'm going to do some examples. Right, so we start with A. Let's start with that first one. So you have a squared minus 16, right? If you go back to first principles that I told you about, so this is going to become the square root of x squared minus the square root of 16 times the square root of x squared plus the square root of 16. We are going back to the basics. So this will give you x minus 4 times x plus 4. In the next examples, I won't write this step. I expect you to know that from here, from x squared minus 16 is equivalent to x minus 4 times x plus 4. Okay? Right, so that's one typical example. Let's move on to another one, like number 5. So let me do number 5. So number 5, you've got 169x squared minus 100, right? This is going to be equivalent to, now what you do here, obviously you find the square root of 169, that's a 13, the square root of x squared, that's x, minus the square root of 100, that's 10 times, then you just repeat what you did in the first bracket, so 13x plus 10. Okay, it's very easy. Very, very easy. Right? Right, Lord. Right, let's move on to, let's do more complex ones. Right? Please, can you try to write as quickly as possible? Huh? Number 8. Okay, let's do number 8. Let's do number 8 as requested. So number 8 is x to the power of 4 minus x squared. Right? Now this one here, if we go back to the basics, because it's slightly more complex, find the square root of x to the power of 4 minus the square root of x squared times the square root of x to the power of 4 plus the square root of x squared. Right? Now the question is, what is the square root of x to the power of 4? Remember, if you've got an algebraic term like this with an exponent, if you want to find its square root, you just divide this exponent by what? By 2. Remember that. You divide the exponent by what? By 2. So this will be x squared minus. If you divide this exponent here, 2, if you divide it by 2, you get what? 1. So you end up having minus x. Then you repeat that, x squared plus x. That's all. Are you following? Huh? Are you following? Okay, so let's move on to the complex one. Right? Let's start with the B1. So we have n to the power of 8 minus 81. Now, if you factorize this, remember, you have to find the square root of n to the power of 8. To find the answer, you divide it by what? By 2. Divide the exponent by 2. You get n to the power of 4 minus the square root of 81, it's a 9, right? Then you repeat that, but you put a positive between them, n to the power of 4 plus 9. Right? Now, sometimes you might have to find a difference of 2 squares 2 times for the same question. Now, do you have a difference of 2 squares here? Right. The first term is the difference of 2 squares. So if we are to factorize completely, we don't stop here. Okay? The next, factorize that, divide the 4 by 2, you get n squared minus 3 times n squared plus 3 times n to the power of 4 plus 9. We can't factorize this because it's a sum of squares. A sum of squares cannot be factorized. But a sum of cubes can be factorized, which we are going to do at the end of this topic. So whenever you get a question with factorization by a difference of 2 squares, check if you still have the binomial which has got 2 squares. Okay, you must check that. Don't just rush to carry on. Because here, the question says factorize fully or completely. Which means if there is an expression which can be factorized, carry on factorize until you don't have an expression that can be factorized. Yes?
You won't fully capitalize both because it's only one. One of the terms.
Okay. I'm trying to get what you mean. Are you saying after factorizing for the first time, right?
You don't factorize the second one.
You only factorize the expression which can be factorized. So here, you can't factorize n to the power 4 plus 9 because it's a sum of 2 squares. A sum of 2 squares cannot be factorized. Is that clear to everyone? A sum of 2 squares cannot be factorized. You only factorize a difference of 2 squares. Okay? So here, it's only, let me use this color. This term here can be factorized. Right? This one cannot be factorized because it's the sum of 2 squares. All right.